Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna, and today we're going to talk about freeCodeCamp, the part of React. So for now, we're taking these exercises of React, Redux, and other parts of frontend because at the end of this, we're going to build these 5 projects. But it's important for us to understand all the little things we can do in the frontend, and then we're going to start doing the projects. But the goal of today is working with React. So let's start. So the first thing we're going to see in here is how to create a simple JSX element. React, it's important to understand, React is a library of JavaScript. That's why before we were working with JavaScript, with HTML and CSS, because all of this will make sense in React. It was created by Facebook, I believe it was in 2013, and it's a great tool to create websites in a more easier way. It will be easier because React works with JavaScript but adds HTML and CSS inside, so it makes everything in one big project. Then let's see in here. So because JSX is a syntax extension of JavaScript, we can actually write JavaScript directly within JSX. So to simplify this, we need to allow us to create a React project using JavaScript. So what are we seeing here? We're creating a constant called JSX, and we're saying that is equals to a div tag. So do you see here, we are working with JavaScript, but the variable JSX in JavaScript is equals to a value that is HTML, a div. So how can we display this div? We have to use this function react.render, the name of the thing we want to render and where we want to render it. Basically, every time we're working with React, we're going to work only with one HTML file, and everything we're going to build in JavaScript in here will be displayed in that HTML file. We normally call this index.html, and in this index.html we normally have one div that has an ID called root. Okay, so this is exactly what we're going to do. This is the index.html being displayed, and we're going to add things here in our JavaScript to display in the HTML. So let's start adding this div. I'm going to call the React DOM.render, and I want to send this JSX document, this JSX variable, and where I want to add this, I want to add in our document.getElementById, where the ID is root. Let's see if it's working. So if I add a h1 here saying hi, for example, it will display hi for us in here, all right? This allowed us to do that. So this function here is allowing us to display things in our HTML. So to pass in this test, we need to say hello JSX exclamation mark, and then we're done with this part. It should return a h1, not a div. So let me remove the div from here, and then everything will run correctly. Now we're going to work with creating a complex JSX element. So previously we were working only with creating an h1. Now we're going to create a div or other things. But one thing that is important, everything we want to write it down, it has to be wrapped around one big div at one big tag. So for example, here, if we want to display multiple paragraphs, we have to display them inside of a div. If we display them without a tag outside of that, it won't work. Okay, so this is exactly what we're gonna do. I'm gonna define here a JSX variable, and I'm gonna open up a div. Let me close the div in here. And what we want to have inside of this div, we want to have an h1. So I'm gonna say hi. Actually, for now, I'm just gonna display the div. And let me use React Router DOM so we can see what's going on. So React DOM render. And here I'm gonna say I wanna display JSX in the document.getElementById root. Okay, so now let's add the h1, and I want to say hello, for example. So now we're able to see our h1. I also want to include a paragraph. I'm going to say hi, for example. And I will include an unordered list with 3 list items. So here ul, and I'm going to add here 3 list items. I'm going to say 1, for example, and I'm going to copy them and display the other numbers. For example, 1, 2, and 3. We must have this outer tag in here, that this is the div, otherwise our JSX won't run. For example, if I remove the div in here, it won't run. It's giving us here these mistakes, okay? So always remember to wrap everything inside of a tag. Now, let's start working with other things that are basic before we understand more complex things, that is creating comments. It's important to give some comments in our code. So every time we're working with JSX, the syntax is curly bracket is slash star slash curly bracket. So we're going to write things inside of the star, but we need these 3 characters, otherwise we're not able to add a comment. So here they're asking us to add a comment somewhere else, somewhere within the provided div element without modifying the h1. So here, since we want to create a comment, curly bracket slash star, and then we close with star slash curly bracket. And if I say here hi there, it won't display in our page because this is a comment, so it's hidden underneath the code. Now we're going to continue working with this React DOM.render to render in other parts of our HTML. For example, if we have another div that it's not the root, we can display only in that particular div. And this is exactly what's going on here. We want to add our JSX component using the React DOM.render. And we're going to define now that we want to display in this ID challenge node, not in the index, in the root anymore. So let's see what happens. You're going to see that will happen the same way it was before. So JSX is what I want to render, and where I want to render in the document dot get element by ID, and here challenge node. And now it will display here for us. This HTML that I mentioned, it is hidden from us, so it's provided from freeCodeCamp in here, and we can use this regularly. Now let's define an HTML class in JSX. So do you remember in HTML, every time we wanted to add a class that we built in CSS or Sass, we just needed to say the word class. But now, if we're working with React, we can't say only the word class. We have to say the word class name. So before we were doing class equals to, for example, my div. But class doesn't work anymore in React, so we have to say class name. Now, let's use our React DOM, JSX, document.get element by ID root. Oh, we don't need this. I believe it's already written for us. So here we are adding this class, and I believe this is pretty much what we have to do. Oh, I added the class in the wrong place. So the class should be not in the H1. We have to add a class in the div, and now it will work. In this part in here, it's more about remembering a little bit about HTML, that every time we open up a tag, we need to know how to close it. So we have some tags in HTML that we need two tags, one to open and another to close, like divs. This is the one to open, this is the one to close. But there are some tags that are self-closing, so we just need one tag, and that's all. That's why here we're having this bug. We need to add a slash. And here in the HR, we don't have a second tag, so we just need to add another slash. And now we're able to see what is going on, and we don't have the bugs anymore. So now we're going to start learning more about the main concepts of React. Before we were just reviewing a little bit how to work with HTML, and React accepts that. But now we're going to work with the most fundamental thing of React, that is components. Everything we're going to build in React, we're going to call as a component. So let's suppose I want to create a form. This whole form will be a component, and then we can implement this in multiple times. We are going to always create a function to save our time, to save lines of code as well. There are two ways of creating a React component, and for now we're gonna learn this stateless functional component. What this means, stateless functional component? This means that the function won't receive any parameter. We're gonna run the function without sending anything to that function. So we're not sending a call or a message, we're not sending anything. Here the parenthesis is empty. And here, every time we have a function, we're gonna define function like we normally do in JavaScript. And if we want to return something to be displayed in the screen, we have to say the word return, parenthesis, and inside the parenthesis we put anything we want in HTML. Okay, so let's do this part right now. We have this function myComponent, we're creating a variable called myComponent, and this myComponent is storing the function we're going to build. So in this function, we want to return a single div element which contains some string text. So like I mentioned, every time we want to return a HTML, we want to return something to be displayed in the page, we need to say the word return, parenthesis, and here they're telling us to create a single div. So here I'm going to create a single div. And I'm gonna say hi, for example. And once we finish this, we're gonna see hi in here. Okay, so instead of writing everything in a variable like we were doing before, we can create functions to be more structured. The other way to define React component is with the ES6 class syntax. And in the following example, we're gonna see how it works. Basically, we can create in an easier way like we were doing. Const, the name of the variable, equals, and we call the function. Or we use the syntax here, class myComponent extends React.component, constructor props, super props, and so on. We normally use this second type of function when we are receiving a parameter when we're calling the function. And what is this parameter? We're gonna see here that is this props. In the future, we're gonna understand better how it works, but for now, that's fine. Let's just understand the big difference. If we don't have any parameter, we do like we did before. If we have a parameter, we do this way, okay? But one thing that I will let you know, this freeCodeCamp here course, it's not an up-to-date version. Nowadays, React has other types of way of writing that it's much easier than this way. But I believe it's important to follow this course because you can understand what's going on. Then, if you are interested, you can search for the documentation of React to see how we do this nowadays. There are a little bit of difference in the syntax, but it's important to understand the logic in here. The thing will be the same. Inside of the render, we're going to return whatever HTML we want to display. All right. Here it's explaining that this class has a constructor and has this supper and so on. But basically, this is creating a function that will allow us to create our component. So let's render here. We're going to return a div that will contain a h1 inside, and we're going to say hello. So here, h1, we're going to say hello React. All right. And now we're able to see here, hello React. So both ways of doing the same thing. Now we're going to create a component with composition. So we can create multiple components and then we can have a screen to display all of these components. So for example here, if we're building a page, we can, instead of defining everything in one file, the navbar, dashboard, and the footer, we can split the navbar in one file, in one component, the dashboard in another component, the footer in another component, and this will save us some lines of code. So we're splitting the logic in our code into functions, and functions mean component in React. All right, so this is pretty much what we're doing. We're creating new tags in HTML, new tags in React that will perform in a way that we want to see. So in the code editor here, there is a simple functional component called child component. That is this function here. So we have a function that is just returning a paragraph that is saying I am the child. Then we have a parent component, and this parent component is expecting to receive something and is saying I am the parent, and we have to build something inside of here. So we have two components and we're gonna make them work together. Our goal is to add the child component inside the parent component. So how can we do this? Child component is already defined, so we're gonna create a tag that will be the name of the component, child component, and then we close with a single tag. And now we're able to see the paragraph that is created in the child component. All right, let's move on. Now we're going to continue the same idea to render this component that we created. So now it's another way of doing the same thing. Here we have types of fruit that is rendering fruits, apple, blueberries, strawberries, and bananas. And here we have a function called fruits where we have to implement something, and here it is displaying types of food and we have to display something. If we take a look, types of food is being displayed. This is the only function that is being displayed in here. But now we need to allow our function to work. So here it's saying that there are two functional components defined in the code called types of fruit and fruits. We're going to take the types of fruit component and compose it or nest it in the fruits. So how can we compose or nest? We're going to call this function types of fruit in here. Types of fruit in here. And we are composing, so we're adding what is inside types of fruit in our fruits. And now we need to call the fruits inside of types of food to display in here. So now if I call fruits, it will display now for us exactly what we did. So we're calling one function inside of the other to make it work. The next part, we're going to continue working with that. So now they are adding more functions so we can feel more comfortable. We have the fruits, and here in fruits, we're going to call the non-citrus and citrus fruits. Let me just show you how it works. First, we're going to call fruits in here. Okay, so we're able to see, so fruits. If I call fruits, it will display the only thing we have here in fruits. But now we want to display a component that is citrus and non-citrus. It's not defined in here, but they are functional components that freeCodeCamp builds to us. So here I'm going to say non-citrus, and when I do this, it will add the non-citrus fruits. And if I say citrus, it will add everything that we have in the other function. Okay, so things are starting to make more sense, right? Now we're going to continue working, but adding everything we saw so far. So instead of calling in the beginning, we were calling our React DOM, the name of the component we wanted, the name of the variable. But now we can add already the tag for that function. So this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to render both components as children in our types of fruit. So we're going to render this fruits and vegetables in here. So fruits and vegetables, and we need to render our types of food. So we're going to use React DOM.render, and what we want to do, we want to display types of food in here, and where we want to render in our document.getElementById challenge node. And now we're able to see everything we saw previously. So now they are just wrapping everything that we saw. Now we're going to write a React component from scratch. So we're going to do everything from scratch together. We're going to define a class myComponent that extends React component. So as we remember, we're going to say class myComponent.extends. I don't remember exactly what is the syntax. So here class React extends. Let's see what is the, because it's hard to remember exactly the syntax. So I'm gonna search here in W3 Schools and we're gonna copy this structure and we're gonna change to what we are expecting. Let me remove this and we're gonna have a class my component that extends React component. And what are we gonna render? We're gonna render a H1. And one good thing that it's important, you don't need to memorize the syntax. It's important that you understand the logic. And if you forget about the syntax, there's no problem to search. You're not a bad programmer if you do this, okay? So then we're gonna say my first React component. But here we just created the component and we need to display this in our screen. So we're gonna say React DOM.render. What is the component? Is my component. And in which part? In document.get element by ID challenge node. And now we will be able to see this H1 saying my first React component. Here it's telling us that we need to display constructor and props. So I'm gonna get exactly one that has this constructor and props. Let me add this in here. And we have to send props. And here we have to send props as well. Okay? So this is the syntax. I just forgot a little bit, but now it's working. Now we're gonna pass the props to a stateless functional component. So now we're gonna be able to work with sending parameters to our functions, like we are familiar in other programming languages. Now in React, we're able to do the same. So our goal is to display the current date in here, but we are not gonna hard code here saying what is the date today. We're going to display here a variable. All right, so here, what is this structure? We're going to, when we call the function, we're going to send the parameter, the name of the parameter and the value. And then inside of our function, we're going to use props. So here we're going to say props dot the name of the parameter we created. So this way we're able to get the content. So here in our calendar, I want to send a date. And here I'm going to use the date object that we have in JavaScript. So this will create a date object for us. So when I'm calling the function current date, I'm sending date. Now in our current date, we have props, so we're expecting to receive here a parameter. And we're gonna display this parameter using curly bracket props dot, what is the name? Date. And then it will display here for us the date. I made a mistake when I said that this function can accept a parameter. It can actually, all right? So we just have two ways of working with functions, and both ways we can receive parameters, all right? Let's continue. So now we're gonna pass an array. Before we were passing a dictionary, a string. Now we're gonna pass an array of props. So here we're sending an array. Remember, array, we use square bracket. And to get the array, we're gonna store and we're gonna join this to become a string. So here in our to-do, we're gonna render the list. And when we're rendering the list, we need to send what is the list that we wanna send. Let's see the name of the variable we are expecting. We don't have any name. I'm gonna call tasks, and I wanna send a array here that I'm gonna say, for example, walk, dog, workout. And for the other time I'm calling lists, I wanna send again a variable called tasks, and I'm gonna say study, sleep, and eat. Okay, I'm sending these two arrays. Now we need to receive this array in here. So in our paragraph, I'm gonna say props.tasks. But we will see here that it's not in a nice way, right? It's not displayed in a correct way. So we're gonna use this .join to add a comma between the items in our array. So here I'm gonna say join, quotation mark, comma, and every time I have a separation, I will add a comma and a space. So now it's looking a little bit better. All right. Now we're gonna create a default props. So in case where we call the function and we're not sending any parameter, we're gonna give a default value for this parameter. All right. So how can we do this? We're gonna say my component dot default props, and we're gonna create here. So in here we are expecting to send items, and I'm gonna give a default value 0. So I'm creating here a parameter items default value 0. Then if we display here the shopping component props.item, items, it's not saying anything. I believe we're gonna do this in the next step. Items 0. So it's not my component, that's the problem. Here we should say shopping cart. This is the name of the component. shopping cart. I believe now if we do props.items, it will display the number 0. Okay, so now we're giving a default value for our item. If we forget to send, we're gonna have a default value. But in the case we send and we have a default, we're able to overwrite. So here we're defining quantity 0, but we can overwrite when we're calling the function items. So here if I say quantity equals to 10, it will overwrite here to 10. So the default value is for the case where we don't send anything, but if we send, it will overwrite for us. Now we're gonna use these prop types not only to send default values, but also define the props we're expecting. So let's suppose we're expecting a function. So we're gonna say handle click prop type.function is required. So here we're saying what is needed to make a component work. All right, we can send these parameters. So in here, we're gonna say the name of our component, items.prop types equals to, we're gonna open up a curly bracket, and what we wanna have this in here. We wanna say that our function here, handle click, is required. So I'm gonna say handle click prop types, it's a function.func is required. So now every time we're calling the function, this is required for us to use. Let me just double check one thing. So it's not a function, we wanna say that it's required to send a item, right? So in our case, we're gonna say item quantity. Here it's a number that we're expecting and is required. I just wrote this wrongly. So now we're saying that our parameter quantity is required and we're specifying what is the type. Okay, let's go to another one. Let me see if I wrote something wrong. So component dot, okay, here I added a capital P. Now I believe it will work. These typos are very normal to happen, so it's important to take a look at what's going on. We learned how we are able to get the parameters we are receiving in the first type of function, that is the stateless function. Now we're going to learn how to use props in this other type of function, that is this class extend react component. If we want to get the props here, we have to define a object that we're going to use this dot props to get. Okay, so what is going on here in our app? We're calling the function welcome, and in the function welcome we want to send name, and here I'm going to display the name G, for example. So every time I call welcome, I want to send the parameter G in here. Well, how can we display G in this part? We need to say that here I want to say this dot props dot name, and now it will work. So now it's saying hello G. So we can't say only props.name, we need to display the word this dot in front. All right, this is the big difference. Now let's review what we just saw between these two cases. So we're gonna create in here what we are expecting. So I have here this campsite, that is this component, and we're calling the function camper. Here in this function camper, we want to send a parameter called name, and the name I want to be camper bot. Actually, I don't know if we should change this. No, we shouldn't change in here. We're gonna create now a component called camper, and we're gonna set a default prop type to camper that is required to receive name. So let's do one step at a time. So let's define our camper function. So I'm gonna say const camper, and we're expecting to receive props. And what is the only thing we want to display in our camper? We want to display one paragraph that will be this name that we are receiving. So here I'm going to say props.name. All right. But what is name? Here they're telling us that our name should be required. So we're going to say camper.prop type is equals to name. And here I'm going to say prop types dot string dot is required. So here we're saying that the parameter name is required when we're calling the function. So now we're defining this as required. Now let's give a default value. So camper dot default type default props is equals to name camper bot. And now it's displaying camper bot, exactly what we were expecting. So we should require the prop to be a type string. I will change its order, okay, to see if now it works. No, it's still name prop types string is required. I think it's missing here prop types. Great, it was a typo. Now we're going to continue working with our component, this extend type, but we're going to use this in a different way. Now, for now, we're always saying this.state, blah, blah, blah. So now we're going to create an object to create this to avoid writing this dot state every time, okay? So I'm gonna say this dot state, and here in this dot state, we want to create the first name. So now we're gonna assign a first name for this dot state dot first name. I'm gonna say Giovanna, for example, and now it's displaying Giovanna in here. So we're able to create here objects to store values for us, and then we can use these values in the rest of the code. So not only using props from the parameters we're receiving when we're calling the function, but we can also create our own variables inside of the function to manipulate them. Now we're gonna continue working with all of this until the rest of our code. So here, we're gonna define a h1 inside of our div, and we're gonna display the value of name. So remember, we have to say this dot state because this is the dictionary, and we want to display the value of name that is freeCodeCamp. So we have to do dot name, and if we close the h1, now it's displaying freeCodeCamp for us. Okay, this is the structure. Now we're gonna do the same, but using another different way, I believe. So let me take a look. Here we're gonna define a constant called name. So I'm gonna create constant name, and we're gonna start the this.state.name. So here I'm gonna do this.state.name. So instead of saying this.state.name multiple times, we can create another variable to store this property in here. And then we can do the same as we did previously, but now just saying name, okay? Because we already defined what name is. That is our this.state.name. So this is another way of breaking it down into more pieces. The set state will allow us to change the value that it's in our object this.state. So every time we want to update, overwrite the value, we're going to use this set state to do this. Okay. Every time we click in this button, we want to change what is appearing here in the screen. So here we have a button on click this handle click. So here we have our function handle click. Okay, we're defining this dot handle click, and now we need to create the function handle click. What are we going to do in the handle click? We're going to change what is for now in the state for another value. So how can we do this? We're going to use the this.state. So this.set state is state. I want to change the name to, in our case, we want to change the name to React Rocks. So in here, once I click in the button, it's changing the variable to React Rocks. Okay. Now we're gonna say this bind this to a class method. So basically a class method typically needs to use the this keyword so it can access properties on the class. So if we want to access the properties we have in here. One common way is to explicitly bind this in the constructor so this becomes bound to the class, method, and so on. So every time we're creating a function that is, we're going to use the this dot name of the function is equals to this dot name of the function, then we need to do dot bind this to allow us to work with that particular function. Okay, so in here is the same problem. We have a button, and every time we click the button we want to change the message in here. So first we need to define, we have the function created in here, but we need to bind this in our function. So I'm going to do this dot name of the function handle click is equal to this dot handle click, the name of the function, dot bind, and in parentheses we're going to say the word this. If I click in here, it won't work because our button is not calling the function handle click. So here we're going to say on click event, I want to call the this dot handle click. Okay, so this allows us to work with our button. This is pretty much what we needed to do in this part. For the next part, we're going to continue working with this idea of creating functions and using the set state to update. But now we're going to work with a toggle element. So if I click, I want to display one thing. If I click, I want to display another thing. So what are we going to do in here? Basically, we want to change the visibility to hidden or appearing. So if the visibility is, we're going to initialize visibility to false. If visibility is true, we're going to display something. If it's false, we're going to display something else. So now let's define this function. So this dot toggle visibility is equals to this dot toggle visibility dot bind this. And now we can define our toggle visibility function. So here we're defining the function, and what do we have to do? We need to update the visibility according to the opposite of it is. So if it's true, we want to become it false. If it's false, we want to convert this to true. Since it's a Boolean, we can just add the not operator in front. So every time we're going to say I want visibility to be not the current value. So what is not true is false, right? And what is not false is true. So if we use this not operator, it will work. So I want to set, I believe I have to say this dot set. So this dot set state, and I want to say visibility will be equals to not visibility. the current value of visibility. So if I click, it weren't able to work. Let me double check. Maybe I wrote this wrong. So let me see. If I have all of this the same name, okay, it all have the same name. Let me see if I made a mistake saying visibility here. Visibility, okay. Oh, we have to use the current value. So it's this dot state dot visibility. And now you see me, now not. So if we want to get the current value of the variable, we need to say this dot state dot and the name of the variable. And this should not be inside the set state, so we shouldn't do this what I just meant. Let me see. Let's try again. So if I click here, it's not working. I have to say what? Let me see here. It's just state. We don't need the word this. So now, still no. We have to pass the parameter state. This is what they are telling us in here. We need to pass the parameter state and then equals arrow, and now the state will understand. It's still not working. Let me see if I understood where is the problem. Okay, I can see here the parenthesis that is missing. Now I think it will work. So if you click, hide and show. All right, now it's working. Great, fantastic. Now we're gonna create a simple counter. We're gonna continue using this idea of building functions to update the value. So if we click in the increment, we wanna add 1. If we click in the decrement, we wanna subtract 1 of our count. And if we click reset, we wanna make count equals to 0. So here we have these 3 buttons, and these 3 buttons is calling the functions. Now we need to first define this function. So this dot